Maya Rodriguez had perfected the art of being invisible. Every morning at Jefferson High School, she would slip through the front doors just as the first bell rang, keeping her head down and her old backpack clutched tight against her chest. She had learned that if you moved quietly enough, if you never made eye contact, most people would look right through you. And that was exactly how Maya preferred it. Her daily routine never changed. She would walk straight to her locker, grab her books, and head to her first class. During lunch, while other students gathered in loud groups around the cafeteria tables, Maya would find an empty corner in the library. She would pull out her sandwich, usually peanut butter and jelly wrapped in a piece of wax paper that her mother had used 3 times already, and eat in silence while pretending to read. The truth was, Maya's family was struggling. Her mother, Carmen, worked at Tony's diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then rushed home to change clothes before heading to her evening job cleaning offices downtown. Some nights, Maya wouldn't see her mother until after 10 o'clock, when Carmen would collapse into their small apartment's-only armchair. Her feet swollen and her eyes tired, Maya never complained. She had learned to cook simple meals for herself, do her own laundry, and keep their tiny apartment clean. She helped wherever she could, even though her mother always told her to focus on her studies. Education is the only way out of this life, Carmen would say, brushing Maya's dark hair before bed. You're smart, Mia, much smarter than your old mother. But being smart didn't make high school any easier? Maya wore the same 3 outfits to school every week. Her jeans had been patched twice, and her sneakers had a small hole near the left toe that she covered with a piece of duct tape. She tried to keep everything clean and neat, but she knew the other students noticed. She could feel their eyes on her sometimes, taking in her worn clothes and her homemade lunches. The worst part wasn't the stares or the whispers. The worst part was the way teachers sometimes looked at her with pity in their eyes. Maya was a good student, always turning in her homework on time and paying attention in class. But she could see that some teachers had already decided what kind of future she would have. They were kind to her, but it was the kind of kindness you give to someone you feel sorry for. Maya's refuge was the music room. Mrs. Chun, the music teacher, had a rule that students could come into the room during study hall if they promised to be quiet. Maya would sit in the back corner, behind the old piano, and watch as other students practiced their instruments. The room was filled with violins, cellos, trumpets, and flutes that belonged to the school. Maya would stare at them and wonder what it would feel like to hold one, to make music instead of just listening to it. She had always loved music. When she was little, her grandmother used to sing Mexican folk songs while cooking dinner. Abuela Rosa had died when Maya was 13, but Maya could still remember her voice, sweet and strong, filling their small kitchen with melody. Her grandmother used to tell stories about playing violin in Mexico before she came to America. Music lives in our family, she would say, touching Maya's chest right over her heart. It's in your blood, Mia. But lessons cost money they didn't have, and instruments were expensive dreams. Maya had looked at the price of violins online once and felt her heart sink. Even the cheapest ones cost more than her mother made in a week. So Maya learned to be content with listening, with watching other students play, with keeping her musical dreams locked away in a place where disappointment couldn't reach them. Everything changed on a Tuesday in October. Mrs. Chun had just finished explaining the details for the annual talent show when Jessica Martinez raised her perfectly manicured hand. Jessica was everything Maya was not. Her father owned 3 restaurants in town, and her mother drove a shiny SUV that was newer than most teachers' cars. Jessica's long black hair was always perfectly styled, and she wore different designer clothes every day. Mrs. Chun, Jessica said in her confident voice, do students have to perform alone, or can we work in groups? Either way is fine, Mrs. Chun replied. The important thing is that you showcase your musical talents. Maya was half listening, doodling in the margins of her notebook, when she heard Jessica's laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made Maya's stomach clench because she knew it meant trouble. What about Maya? Jessica called out, and suddenly every head in the room turned toward the back corner where Maya sat. I bet she could play violin. She looks like the type, don't you think? The room erupted in giggles and whispers. Maya felt her cheeks burn red as 20 pairs of eyes stared at her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into her chair and become invisible again. The joke was obvious to everyone. The poor girl, playing violin, it was ridiculous. Maya always sits so quietly back there, Jessica continued, enjoying the attention. I bet she's been hiding some secret talent from us, haven't you, Maya? Maya's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her mouth felt dry and her hands were shaking slightly. She could feel the weight of their stares, their barely contained laughter, their expectation that she would crumble under the spotlight, but something strange happened in that moment. Instead of shrinking away, instead of mumbling an excuse and hoping they would leave her alone, Maya felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. It might have been anger or pride, or maybe just exhaustion from being invisible for so long. She looked up and met Jessica's eyes directly. "Maybe I will," she said quietly. The laughter got louder. Someone in the front row whispered, "Yeah, right." And someone else made a comment about Maya probably thinking a violin was something you ate. Maya felt each word like a small slap, but she kept her back straight and her voice steady. "I think that would be wonderful," Mrs. Chun said firmly. And the laughter died down a little. "Anyone who wants to participate is welcome to sign up." When the bell rang and students began filing out of the room, Jessica stopped by Maya's desk. She leaned down, close enough that Maya could smell her expensive perfume. "I hope you know I was just kidding," Jessica said, but her smile was sharp around the edges. "I mean, you don't actually think you can play violin, do you? Your family probably doesn't even own a radio." Maya looked up at her and smiled. It was a small smile, but there was something in it that made Jessica take a step back. "I guess we'll find out," Maya said softly, that afternoon. Maya walked home through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, Jessica's words echoing in her head. The other students thought she was crazy. They expected her to embarrass herself, to prove that poor girls didn't belong on stage making music. They wanted her to fail, but Maya had a secret that none of them knew. A secret that had been keeping her sane for the past 3 years. A secret that connected her to her grandmother's memory and her own dreams. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Maya was already planning. The talent show was in 6 weeks. It was time to show them what the invisible girl could really do. Maya's secret began 3 years ago on a hot Saturday morning in July. She had been walking home from the grocery store, carrying 2 heavy bags for her mother, when she noticed the yard sale sign at the end of Maple Street. Maya usually ignored these sales because her family couldn't afford to buy things they didn't absolutely need. But something made her stop that day. Maybe the way the morning sunlight was hitting the tables full of old treasures. An elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson was selling items from her late husband's music room. There were old records, sheet music, and a small collection of instruments that had seen better days. Maya's eyes immediately went to a violin case sitting on a card table in the shade. The case was old and scuffed with one of the latches broken, and held together with electrical tape. "How much for the violin?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Patterson opened the case and Maya's heart sank a little. The violin inside looked tired. Its dark wood was scratched and worn, and one of the strings was missing entirely. There was a small crack running along the side, and the bow was frayed at the tip. "Oh, honey, this old thing hasn't been played in years," Mrs. Patterson said kindly. "My husband bought it at a pawn shop decades ago, thinking he'd learn to play. Never did get around to it. I hate to see it just sitting here, but I suppose it's not worth much." Maya stared at the instrument, imagining her grandmother's hands holding something similar all those years ago in Mexico. Even damaged, even forgotten, it was still a violin. It still had the potential to make music. "Would you take $5? Maya asked, pulling out the crumpled bills from her pocket. It was money she had saved from returning bottles and cans. Money she had planned to use for a birthday gift for her mother. Mrs. Patterson looked at Maya's eager face and nodded. "I think that old violin would be happy to have someone who wants to play it again." Maya carried the violin case home like she was holding a treasure chest. She hid it under her bed and didn't tell her mother about it right away. She knew Carmen would worry about the money, would feel guilty that Maya was spending her savings on something that might not even work. The first challenge was the missing string. Maya researched online and found that violin strings cost money she didn't have, but she was determined. She saved every penny she could find, collected cans from neighbors, and even helped Mrs. Garcia next door with her grocery shopping for a few dollars here and there. After 2 weeks, she had enough money to buy a replacement string from the music store downtown. The man at the music store looked surprised when Maya walked in with her $5 violin. "You sure you want to put a new string on this old thing?" he asked, examining the instrument. "Might cost more than it's worth," but Maya was sure. She watched carefully as he restrung the violin and tuned it. When he handed it back to her, she held it like it was made of glass. "You know how to play?" he asked. Maya shook her head. "Not yet, but I'm going to learn." That night, after her mother had fallen asleep exhausted from her double shift, Maya crept down to the basement of their apartment building. The laundry room was the only place she could practice without disturbing anyone. She had discovered that the concrete walls muffled the sound, and late at night, she had the space to herself, learning to play violin from YouTube. Videos and library books was harder than Maya had ever imagined. Her fingers didn't know where to go on the strings. The bow felt awkward in her hand, and when she tried to play, the sounds that came out were more like screeches than music. Some nights she wanted to give up, to put the violin back in its case, and forget about her grandmother's stories, but Maya was stubborn. Every night she would take her violin and her grandmother's old sheet music down to the basement. She would watch the same YouTube tutorial over and over, pausing and rewinding, until her fingers started to understand. She practiced holding the bow correctly, positioning her left hand on the neck, and finding the right pressure to make clean sounds instead of squeaks. The breakthrough came after 2 months of practice. Maya was working on a simple scale when, suddenly, the notes came out clear and true. It was just 5 notes, nothing fancy, but they sounded like actual music. She was so excited she almost cried right there in the laundry room. From that night on, Maya's progress got faster. She learned to read music using her grandmother's old sheets, which were written in Spanish but used the same musical notation. She discovered that her grandmother had written little notes in the margins, reminders about finger positions and bow techniques. It was like getting music lessons from beyond the grave. Maya's practice routine became sacred to her. Every night after finishing her homework and helping around the apartment, she would wait until her mother was asleep, then slip down to the basement with her violin. She would practice scales until her fingers moved smoothly across the strings, then work on simple melodies she found online. The music became her escape from everything else. When she was playing, she wasn't the poor girl with patched jeans and worn shoes. She wasn't worried about her mother working too hard or about fitting in at school. When she was playing, she was connected to something bigger than her everyday problems. As months passed, Maya's playing improved dramatically. She learned to play Mexican folk songs that her grandmother used to sing, classical pieces she found in the library, and even some modern songs she heard on the radio. Her fingers grew calloused from the strings, and her bow arm grew strong and steady. The strangest part was how natural it felt. Maya had never considered herself particularly talented at anything. She was a decent student, but not outstanding. She wasn't athletic or artistic in any obvious way. But when she held the violin, everything clicked. It was like her hands remembered something her mind had never learned. Sometimes, late at night in the basement, Maya would close her eyes and imagine her grandmother watching her play. She could almost hear Abuela Rosa's voice saying, "See, Mia, the music is in your blood. I knew it would find its way out." Maya never told anyone about her secret. Not her mother, not her teachers, certainly not her classmates. The violin remained hidden under her bed during the day, and her nightly practice sessions in the basement were her private world. She became an expert at moving silently through the apartment, at slipping downstairs without making the old floors creak. There were close calls. Once, her mother woke up when Maya was coming back from practice and asked where she had been. Maya said she couldn't sleep and had gone to get some water. Another time, Mrs. Garcia mentioned hearing beautiful music coming from somewhere in the building late at night. Maya's heart raced, but she just nodded and said it was probably someone's television. The violin case under her bed held more than just an instrument. It held 3 years of dedication, of dreams quietly pursued, of a connection to her heritage that she had thought was lost forever. It held proof that she was more than what people saw when they looked at her worn clothes and shy demeanor. Maya had become a violinist in secret, learning not just to play music but to pour her heart into every note. She had no idea that this hidden talent would soon change everything about her life at school. She had no idea that Jessica's cruel joke would become the opportunity she had been unconsciously preparing for. All she knew was that when she held her grandmother's sheet music and raised her bow to the strings, she was exactly who she was meant to be. The talent show sign-up sheet appeared on Mrs. Chun's classroom door the next morning. Maya stood in front of it for a full minute, staring at the blank lines where students would write their names and talents. Her pen felt heavy in her hand as she wrote Maya Rodriguez Violin in her careful handwriting. The moment she finished writing, she wanted to erase it and run away. But she forced herself to walk to her first class instead. By lunchtime, word had spread through Jefferson High like wildfire. Maya could hear the whispers following her down the hallways. Students would stop talking when she walked by, then burst into giggles once she passed. She caught fragments of conversations. "Can you believe it? And this is going to be so embarrassing, and someone should tell her before she makes a fool of herself." Jessica had turned Maya's talent show entry into the biggest joke of the week. During lunch, she held court at her usual table in the center of the cafeteria, telling anyone who would listen about the poor girl who thinks she can play violin. Maya sat in her corner of the library, trying to focus on her sandwich, but she could feel the stares even from there. "I mean, it's actually kind of sad," Jessica was saying to her group of friends. "She probably doesn't even know what a violin looks like up close. My little sister has been taking lessons since she was 6, and even she's not ready to perform in public yet." Tyler, one of Jessica's followers, added, "Maybe we should start a collection to buy her lessons, as charity." The group erupted in laughter, and Maya felt her cheeks burn from across the room. She had dealt with their mockery before, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that hurt deeper than their usual comments about her clothes or her lunch. The worst part was the way some of the teachers looked at her now. Mrs. Henderson, her English teacher, pulled her aside after class with a concerned expression. "Maya, honey, are you sure about this talent show? There's no shame in changing your mind. Maybe you could help with the lighting or sound instead?" Even Mr. Garcia, the janitor who always said hello to Maya in the hallways, shook his head sadly when he saw her name on the list. "Mia," he said quietly in Spanish, "sometimes it's better to stay in the shadows where it's safe." But the person who surprised Maya the most was Mrs. Chun herself. 3 days after the sign-up sheet had gone up, Mrs. Chun asked Maya to stay after class. "Maya," she said, sitting down at the piano bench and gesturing for Maya to take a seat nearby, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Maya's heart started racing. She was sure Mrs. Chun was going to ask her to withdraw from the talent show to save herself from embarrassment. "Do you actually play violin?" Mrs. Chun asked gently. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. "How long have you been playing?" 3 years, Maya whispered. Mrs. Chun raised her eyebrows. "Have you had lessons?" Maya shook her head. "I taught myself." "From videos and books?" Mrs. Chun was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya's face. There was something in the girl's eyes that didn't match the shy, withdrawn student she saw in class. Every day, when Maya talked about playing violin, even in whispers, there was a spark there that Mrs. Chun had learned to recognize in her years of teaching music. "Would you like to borrow one of the school's violins for the performance?" Mrs. Chun offered. "Some of our instruments are quite good, much better than what a beginner might have at home." Maya shook her head firmly. "Thank you, but I have my own." "Maya," Mrs. Chun said carefully, "I've been teaching music for 15 years. I've seen students get up on stage unprepared, and it's not something I like to watch. If you're not ready, there's no shame in waiting until next year. Maya looked up and met her teacher's eyes directly. I'm ready, she said quietly. Something in her voice made Mrs. Chun pause. It wasn't the voice of a student who was about to embarrass herself. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. All right then, Mrs. Chun said. I'll put you down for a 5-minute slot. And Maya, I'll be rooting for you. As the weeks passed, the mockery only got worse. Students would make jokes about bringing earplugs to the talent show. Someone started a rumor that Maya was going to play a cardboard violin she had made herself. A few kids even approached her directly, offering to help her practice in the music room, clearly expecting to catch her in her lie. Maya endured it all with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. She didn't argue with them or try to prove anything. She just went to her classes, did her homework, and every night she went down to the basement to practice, but the constant attention was wearing on her. For 3 years, she had been invisible, and being invisible had been safe. Now, everyone was watching her, waiting for her to fail. Some nights, she would sit in the laundry room with her violin in her lap, wondering if she should just withdraw from the talent show and go back to being nobody. The breaking point came 2 weeks before the performance. Maya was at her locker when she overheard Jessica talking to a group of students near the water fountain. My dad said he's going to record the whole thing, Jessica was saying. We can put it online afterward. It'll be hilarious. Poor Maya will probably be famous for all the wrong reasons. That's kind of mean, isn't it? One of the quieter students asked. Jessica shrugged. She signed up for this. If she didn't want people to laugh at her, she shouldn't have pretended to be something she's not. I'm actually doing her a favor by teaching her a lesson about knowing her place. Maya closed her locker slowly and walked away, but Jessica's words echoed in her head for the rest of the day. Knowing her place? As if being poor meant she wasn't allowed to have dreams or talents. As if her family's financial situation determined what she was capable of achieving. That night, Maya sat in the basement with her violin, but she didn't play right away. Instead, she thought about her grandmother, about the stories of playing music in Mexico before coming to America. She thought about all the evenings she had spent down here, learning to coax beautiful sounds from her $5 violin. She thought about the calluses on her fingertips and the strength in her bow arm that had taken years to develop. Maya lifted her violin and began to play. She started with a simple melody, then moved into one of the more complex pieces she had mastered. The music filled the small basement room, echoing off the concrete walls. It was beautiful, and it was hers. She realized something important in that moment. Jessica and the other students could mock her clothes, her lunch, her family situation, but they couldn't touch this. They couldn't take away the music that lived inside her, the talent she had developed through years of dedication, the connection to her grandmother's legacy. Maya had spent 3 years becoming a musician in secret. She had earned the right to call herself a violinist through countless hours of practice and determination. She wasn't pretending to be something she wasn't. She was finally ready to show the world who she really was when she went to bed that night. Maya wasn't thinking about Jessica's cruel words or the students who expected her to fail. She was thinking about the song she would play at the talent show, about the moment when she would step onto that stage and let her music speak for itself. The invisible girl was about to become impossible to ignore. The night of the talent show arrived with a cold October wind that rattled the windows of Jefferson High School. Maya had barely slept the night before, running through her piece over and over in her mind. She had chosen to play Clair de Lune, followed by a traditional Mexican song called Las Mañanitas that her grandmother used to hum while cooking. It was a risky choice, mixing classical music with folk tradition, but it felt right to Maya. It felt like her story. Carmen had insisted on coming to watch, even though it meant losing a night's pay from her cleaning job. "My daughter is performing," she had said proudly to Mrs. Garcia. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." Maya felt guilty about the lost money, but she was also secretly grateful. She needed her mother there tonight. The school auditorium was packed. Maya peeked through the backstage curtains and saw families filling every seat. The stage lights were bright and hot, and she could hear the buzz of excited conversations from the audience. Her hands were trembling slightly as she opened her violin case for the last time before her performance. The violin looked even more worn under the harsh backstage lights. The scratch along its side seemed deeper, and the mismatched strings were more obvious than ever. For a moment, Maya felt a wave of panic. What if Jessica was right? What if she was about to embarrass herself in front of the entire school? Maya Rodriguez? A student volunteer with a clipboard appeared beside her. "You're up in 10 minutes. Are you ready?" Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was lying. She could hear the current performer on stage, a junior named Kevin, who was playing guitar and singing a popular song. The crowd was clapping along, and he sounded good, really good. Maya's stomach twisted with nerves. She found a quiet corner backstage and sat down with her violin. She closed her eyes and tried to transport herself back to the basement laundry room, to those peaceful nights when it was just her and the music. She thought about her grandmother's hands, imagining them guiding her own as she positioned her fingers on the strings. "Abuela," she whispered in Spanish, "help me make you proud tonight." From the audience, she could hear Jessica's distinctive laugh. Maya opened her eyes and saw through a gap in the curtains that Jessica and her friends had claimed the entire front row. They had their phones out, just as Jessica had promised, ready to record Maya's humiliation. Jessica was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Maya's family spent on groceries in a month. "Look at her back there," Jessica whispered loudly to her friends, pointing toward the backstage area. "She looks terrified." "This is going to be even better than I thought." Maya felt her cheeks burn, but then she noticed something else. Her mother was sitting in the third row, wearing her best dress and looking nervous but proud. Carmen caught Maya's eye through the curtain gap and gave her a small wave and an encouraging smile. Next to her sat Mrs. Chun, who had saved Carmen a seat and was holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the student announcer's voice boomed through the auditorium, "our next performer is Maya Rodriguez, playing violin." The applause was polite but scattered. Maya could hear some snickering mixed in with the clapping. She stood up, her legs feeling shaky, and walked toward the stage entrance. "Break a leg," whispered another student performer who was waiting for his turn. Maya stepped onto the stage, carrying her violin case. The lights were so bright she could barely see the audience, but she could feel their eyes on her. She could hear whispers and the sound of phones being lifted to record. Her heart was beating so fast. She was sure the microphone would pick it up. She walked to the center of the stage and carefully opened her violin case. The whispers got louder when people saw her instrument. Even from a distance, it was obvious that this wasn't a fancy violin. It looked like something from a garage sale, which of course it was. "Oh my God," she heard Jessica say from the front row, not even trying to keep her voice down. "That thing looks like it's held together with tape." More laughter rippled through the audience. Maya felt her face getting hot, but she forced herself to keep moving. She lifted the violin from its case and checked the tuning, adjusting the strings slightly. The small movements gave her something to focus on other than the growing sounds of amusement from the crowd. A boy in the back row called out, "Are you sure that thing still works?" The laughter got louder. Maya could see some parents in the audience, looking uncomfortable, but nobody told the students to quiet down. She finished tuning and looked out at the sea of faces, many of them already smirking in anticipation of her failure. Maya lifted the violin to her chin and positioned her bow. In that moment, everything else faded away. The mocking voices, the bright lights, the hundreds of staring eyes, none of it mattered anymore. She was back in the basement laundry room, alone with her music and her grandmother's memory. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first note that came from her violin was pure and clear, cutting through the whispers like a knife through silk. The laughter died instantly, replaced by surprised silence. Maya's fingers found their positions on the strings with practiced ease, and her bow moved with the grace of someone who had spent years perfecting every movement. Claire de Lune flowed from her violin like water, each note crystal clear and perfectly placed. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, and Maya played it with an emotion that came from deep in her soul. She thought about all the nights she had practiced this piece, all the times she had imagined playing it for an audience, all the dreams she had kept locked away for so long. The auditorium was completely silent now, except for the sound of her music. Maya could feel the shift in the audience, could sense their surprise turning into something else entirely. She opened her eyes and saw faces that were no longer mocking or dismissive. They were amazed. In the front row, Jessica's mouth was hanging open, her phone forgotten in her lap. She looked like she had been slapped by something she couldn't understand. Her friends sat frozen beside her, their cruel smiles replaced by expressions of shock. Maya's mother had tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed to her heart. Mrs. Chen was leaning forward in her seat, her eyes wide with recognition of true talent. Even the other students backstage had gathered in the wings to listen. As Maya transitioned from Claire de Lune into Las Mananitas, she felt her grandmother's presence with her on that stage. This was the song Abuela Rosa had hummed while making tortillas, the melody that had filled their small kitchen with warmth and love. Maya played it with all the tenderness and passion she had inherited from her grandmother, letting the music tell the story of their family, their struggles, and their dreams. The folk melody soared through the auditorium, and Maya could see people in the audience wiping their eyes. Her violin sang with a voice that spoke of heritage and hope, of love that transcends death, of beauty that can emerge from the most humble beginnings. Maya was no longer the invisible girl in the back of the classroom. She was a musician and artist, a keeper of her family's musical legacy. And everyone in that auditorium finally saw her for who she truly was. As Maya drew her bow across the strings for the final notes of Las Mananitas, something magical happened in Jefferson High's auditorium. The last note hung in the air like a prayer, floating over an audience that had been completely transformed. For a moment that felt like forever, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody made a sound. Maya stood on the stage, her violin still tucked under her chin, her eyes closed as the echo of her grandmother's favorite song faded into silence. She had poured everything into that performance, 3 years of secret practice, a lifetime of dreams, all the love she felt for her grandmother's memory, and all the pain she had carried from being invisible for so long. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause began. It started with Mrs. Chen, who stood up from her seat in the third row and began clapping with tears streaming down her face. Maya's mother jumped to her feet beside her, sobbing with pride and joy. One by one, the entire auditorium rose to their feet, the applause growing louder and louder until it was thunderous. Maya opened her eyes and blinked in the bright stage lights, struggling to understand what was happening. The same students who had been laughing at her just minutes ago were now standing and cheering. Parents who didn't even know her name were wiping their eyes and applauding like they had just witnessed something extraordinary. In the front row, Jessica sat frozen in her seat while everyone around her stood and clapped. Her phone had slipped from her hands onto the floor, the cruel video she had planned to make completely forgotten. Her face was wet with tears. She hadn't even realized she was crying. For the first time in her life, Jessica Martinez was speechless. "Maya! Maya! Maya!" Someone started chanting from the back of the auditorium, and soon the whole crowd had picked it up. The girl who had spent years trying to be invisible was now the center of attention in the most beautiful way possible. Maya lowered her violin and looked out at the sea of faces. She could see Mr. Rodriguez, the math teacher, standing and clapping with a huge smile on his face. Mrs. Thompson from the office was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Even Tyler, one of Jessica's usual followers, was on his feet applauding and looking ashamed of how he had treated Maya, but the face that mattered most was her mother's. Carmen was crying so hard she could barely stand, but her smile was brighter than the stage lights. She was clapping and pointing at Maya, turning to the people around her and saying in Spanish, "That's my daughter. That's my baby." Mrs. Chen stepped up to the microphone that the announcer had left on the side of the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice shaking with emotion, I've been teaching music for 15 years, and I've never heard anything quite like what we just experienced. Maya Rodriguez, everyone. The applause erupted again, even louder than before. Maya felt overwhelmed by the love and energy flowing toward her from the audience. She had dreamed of this moment for 3 years, but the reality was more powerful than anything she had imagined. As the clapping finally began to die down, Maya carefully placed her violin back in its worn case. She looked at the instrument that had carried her through this incredible night, the $5 violin with its scratches and mismatched strings that had just proven that beauty doesn't depend on price tags or perfect appearances. Thank you, Maya said quietly into the microphone, her voice barely audible but somehow carrying to every corner of the auditorium. This was for my grandmother, Rosa, who taught me that music lives in our blood, and for my mother, who works so hard to give me every opportunity. And it was for everyone who has ever felt invisible. The audience erupted one more time, and Maya walked off the stage on shaking legs. As soon as she was backstage, she was surrounded by other performers, students, and teachers who wanted to congratulate her. Maya, that was incredible, said Kevin, the guitar player who had performed before her. I had no idea you could play like that. Where did you learn? Asked another student. Do you have a private teacher? I taught myself, Maya said simply. And the group around her fell silent in amazement. Mrs. Chun pushed through the crowd and pulled Maya into a hug. You beautiful, talented girl, she whispered. I am so sorry I doubted you. That was absolutely extraordinary. Thank you for believing in me when it mattered, Maya replied. As the other acts finished and the talent show came to an end, Maya made her way to the auditorium lobby where families were gathering. Her mother reached her first, wrapping her in the tightest hug of her life. Mia, I had no idea, Carmen sobbed. You have been hiding this beautiful gift from me. I am so proud of you I can't even find the words. I wanted to surprise you, Maya said, hugging her mother back. And I wanted to prove that we don't need money to have dreams come true. Your grandmother would be so proud, Carmen whispered. I could feel her with us tonight. People kept coming up to Maya throughout the evening. Parents she had never met told her how much her performance had moved them. Students who had never spoken to her before wanted to know more about her music. Even some of Jessica's friends approached her, looking embarrassed about their earlier behavior. Maya, said one of them, we're really sorry about how we acted. We had no idea you were actually talented. That was amazing. Maya nodded graciously but didn't say much. She understood that they meant well, but she also knew that their apology came only after she had proven herself worthy of their respect. Still, she chose to focus on the positive. Tonight had changed everything. The biggest surprise came when Jessica herself finally approached Maya near the end of the evening. Jessica's mascara was smudged from crying, and she looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had that morning. Maya, Jessica said quietly, I owe you an apology, a big one. What I did was cruel and wrong, and I'm ashamed of myself. You have an incredible gift, and I should never have tried to humiliate you for it. Maya looked at Jessica for a long moment. She could have been angry, could have thrown Jessica's cruelty back in her face. Instead, she chose grace. Thank you for saying that, Maya said simply. It means a lot. I hope someday you can forgive me, Jessica said. And Maya could see that she really meant it. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Maya walked through the parking lot with her mother and Mrs. Chun, who had offered to drive them home. She carried her violin case carefully, but it felt lighter now somehow, like it was filled with joy instead of secrets. What happens now? Carmen asked her daughter. Maya smiled, thinking about all the possibilities that had opened up for her tonight. Mrs. Chun had already mentioned scholarship programs for talented students. Other parents had asked about private performances. The world suddenly felt much bigger than it had that morning. Now I keep playing, Maya said. But I don't have to hide anymore. The invisible girl was invisible no more. Maya Rodriguez had found her voice, and the whole world was listening.